Some people treat their mechanic like a priest, confessing sins against machinery that no car deserves to hear. 1. The car that wouldn't start. Because it was in drive. A man once called a tow truck, furious that his brand new sedan refused to start. The mechanic arrives, hops in, looks down. The car's in drive. That's it. The man had been sitting there for half an hour, pumping the gas, cursing the battery, and threatening to sue the dealership. The mechanic quietly shifts it to park, turns the key, and the engine purrs to life. The customer's response? Yeah, that's what it was doing before. Somewhere, an entire engineering team felt the faint urge to retire. 2. The broken air conditioner in the middle of winter. A woman storms into a repair shop complaining that her AC is blowing cold air. In December, she insists it's malfunctioning because, quote, "it's freezing in there." The mechanic gently explains that, yes, the air conditioner's job is to make things cold. She pauses, blinks, and says, "Then why would anyone use it in winter?" After 10 minutes of circular logic and escalating confusion, the tech finally realizes she'd meant to turn on the heater. It's the only time in history someone paid $90 in labor just to learn the difference between snowflake and sun symbols. 3. The engine that smelled like burning. A panicked call comes in. "My car smells like smoke, and I think it's on fire." The mechanic rushes to the scene expecting disaster, flames, smoke, maybe a raccoon with a matchstick. Instead, he finds a McDonald's bag jammed against the engine block, slowly roasting a forgotten quarter-pounder. The customer stares in disbelief and says, "So, it's not the alternator?" "Nope, just your lunch achieving spiritual ascension." The burger didn't survive, but the smell of shame lingered longer than any warranty could cover. 4. The flat tire. That wasn't flat. One man demanded an emergency service call because one of his tires was completely flat. The mechanic arrives, inspects it, and immediately bursts out laughing. The tire was fine. He'd just parked with one wheel on the curb, making it look lower on one side. The driver had taken 3 separate measurements with a ruler before calling. When told the truth, he tried to argue that the curb must have expanded overnight. Scientists are still studying the rare phenomenon known as ego under pressure. 5. The dead car that wasn't plugged in. A proud new owner of an electric vehicle called her dealer to complain that her EV wouldn't charge. She was furious. She'd tried everything. When the technician arrived, he found the car sitting in the driveway, cable perfectly coiled, but not connected to anything. She'd assumed the wireless charging rumors she saw on TikTok were true. When he explained it needed to be physically plugged into the wall, she gasped and said, "Well, that's stupid. What's the point of electricity then?" Somewhere, Nikola Tesla rolled over in his grave, unplugged himself, and went back to sleep. 6. The oil change. That wasn't a man brings in his SUV complaining that the engine keeps making this horrible grinding sound. The mechanic checks the dipstick. Bone dry, not a drop of oil. He asks when it was last changed. The man proudly replies, "Oh, I never add oil. I thought cars come with lifetime oil." Turns out he'd owned the vehicle for 6 years and assumed oil was like windshield fluid. It just stays in there. The mechanic told him the engine was toast, and the man looked genuinely betrayed, as if the car had broken a sacred promise. "They should have warned me," he said. They did. In the owner's manual, on page 1, in bold. 7. The car that wouldn't go over 40. A driver storms into a garage yelling that his car refuses to go over 40 miles an hour. He's convinced the transmission is failing. The mechanic takes it for a spin and immediately notices the smell of burning brakes. Turns out, the man had been driving with the parking brake fully engaged for 3 weeks. When told, he replied, "I thought that light on the dashboard just meant the car was serious." The mechanic just nodded, silently debating whether to charge him for repairs or therapy. 8. The mystery rattling noise. A woman complained that her car made a strange clunking sound like a gremlin trapped inside. The mechanic popped the trunk and found 5 bowling balls rolling around freely. She stared, gasped, and said, "Oh, I wondered where those went." The best part? She'd been hearing the rattle for over 2 months and assumed the car was haunted. The mechanic simply said, "Ma'am, your ghost has a 7-10 split." 9. The smoke. Coming from the dashboard. A frantic man called 911, then his mechanic, reporting that his dashboard was on fire. He described smoke pouring from the vents and said he could smell burning electronics. When the mechanic arrived, he found no smoke, just a cinnamon roll wedged in the defrost vent. The man sheepishly admitted he'd placed it there to keep it warm on the way to work. The roll had caramelized into a pastry-based time bomb. In his defense, he technically invented the first dashboard toaster. Detroit still hasn't forgiven him. 10. The car that wouldn't reverse a teenager brought in his mom's minivan, claiming reverse gear was broken. "It just won't back up," he said confidently. The mechanic gets in, starts the car, and gently removes the wooden block the kid had placed behind the rear tire, so it wouldn't roll away while parked. The boy turned crimson. His defense? "I thought the car was just scared to go backward." The mechanic handed him the block like it was a diploma in automotive idiocy. "Congratulations," he said. "You've officially graduated from the School of Nope." 11. The check engine light that was too bright. One man brought in his car because, quote, "That orange light keeps hurting my eyes." The mechanic asked if he'd read what it said. The man shook his head. He thought the check engine light was a reminder to schedule an eye exam. When told it was the car's way of screaming for help, he got defensive and said, "Well, I taped over it." Sure enough, there was a piece of duct tape over the dashboard. It's the only known case of a man successfully silencing both his conscience and his combustion engine at the same time. 12. The weird beeping sound. A woman brought in her SUV, saying there was a constant beeping sound that comes from nowhere. She'd been living with it for weeks and said it only stopped at night. The mechanic sits down, listens, and immediately finds the culprit, a phone in the cup holder, low battery alert on loop. She gasps and says, "Oh, I thought that was the seatbelt warning." The best part? Her actual seatbelt light had been flashing the whole time. She'd been driving unbuckled, scared of a phone, and serenaded by the sound of her own negligence. Modern symphony composed in key D for dumb. 13. The steering problem. That wasn't a man, complained that his steering felt tight and jerky. Something was definitely wrong with the suspension, he insisted. The mechanic took one look and spotted the issue. The man's front tires were bald, one rear tire was from a completely different vehicle, and all four were inflated to different pressures. The car looked like it was auditioning for a circus act. When told this was the cause, the man nodded seriously and said, "So you're saying it's an alignment issue?" "No, sir. It's a life choices issue." The car was trying to steer away from him. 14. The car that ran out of power every night. A panicked woman brought in her electric vehicle, saying that every single morning it woke up dead. The mechanic checked the diagnostics. Battery totally empty. "Did you plug it in overnight?" he asked. "No," she said proudly. "I turned it off to save electricity." Turns out, she'd been turning off the house breaker connected to the charger every night, thinking she was being eco-conscious. The car wasn't dying. She was starving it. The mechanic kindly explained that energy saving doesn't work like vampire lore. You don't have to protect the car from power. It's not Dracula. 15. The horrible shaking problem. A man stormed into the shop saying his truck vibrates violently whenever I hit 60. The mechanic took it for a spin, smooth as butter. When asked to demonstrate, the man jumped in, floored it to 60, and started shaking the steering wheel himself. "See? It's doing it again." The mechanic blinked twice, mentally rebooted, and realized this was one of those moments where logic simply takes the day off. The shaking wasn't the truck, it was the driver. "Sir," the mechanic said carefully, "you are the vibration." The man frowned, then said, "So, alignment?" 16. The car that kept honking by itself. A man came in furious that his car kept honking randomly, claiming it was haunted or hacked by foreign satellites. The mechanic pops the hood and finds the issue instantly. The guy had zip-tied his grocery bag to the steering wheel, right on top of the horn button. Every time he turned the wheel, the milk jugs politely screamed. When told, the man's only question was, "Can I get that fixed under warranty?" "Sure, as long as your policy covers self-inflicted stupidity." 17. The oil light that wasn't a suggestion. A woman ignored her oil warning light for 6 months because she thought it was just a reminder, like a dentist postcard. When the car finally seized up and died, she blamed the manufacturer for not making it more urgent. The mechanic showed her the melted remains of the engine, which now resembled lasagna. She crossed her arms and said, "Well, it didn't say emergency. It just said check. Somewhere, an English teacher wept softly over the meaning of verbs. 18. The weird clicking. From the dashboard. A driver complained that his car was making a ticking noise like it's counting down to explode. The mechanic took a look and discovered a loose turn signal relay, a $3 fix. But before that, the man had spent an entire weekend parked in his driveway, convinced it was a bomb planted by his ex-girlfriend. He'd even called the police, who evacuated the neighborhood. The mechanic fixed it in 5 minutes, charged him $10, and told him the explosion was just the sound of his ego detonating. 19. The windshield crack that healed itself. A guy proudly told his mechanic that his cracked windshield fixed itself overnight. Intrigued, the tech checked and found a perfect line of tape across the crack, coated in fresh paint. The man sheepishly admitted that he didn't remember doing that, but his wife later confessed she'd used clear nail polish to fill the gap. The next rainstorm turned the inside of their car into a glittery chemistry experiment. Moral of the story: superglue might hold your marriage together, but it's not rated for highway speeds. 20. The car that wouldn't lock. A man called roadside assistance in a panic. His key fob wasn't locking the doors. The technician arrived, pressed the button, and heard a satisfying click. The man jumped, looked confused, and said, "Wait, that worked for you?" The tech asked him to demonstrate. He held up his TV remote. Turns out he'd been trying to lock his Toyota with a Samsung. "It worked last night," he claimed. "Yeah," the tech said. On channel 321. The strange rattling under the hood. A nervous couple swore something was alive inside the engine. The mechanic opened the hood expecting a rat nest or maybe a bird. Instead, he found a full bag of grocery store onions. The wife screamed, "Oh my God, they followed us home!" Turns out she'd accidentally dropped the bag during loading and it had wedged into the compartment. The onions roasted themselves to perfection on the drive, giving the whole car a French onion aroma for weeks. Michelin stars, 0. Irony level, delicious. 22. The GPS that lied. A man accused his GPS of sabotage after it told him to take a right turn, straight into a lake. When the tow truck arrived, the car was half submerged, the driver sitting calmly inside like he was waiting for room service. "It told me to turn," he said. The mechanic sighed. "It also told you to swim?" The man shrugged. "Technology's supposed to be smarter than me." It was that day. It got him straight to the bottom, faster than logic ever could. 23. The wiper fluid that froze solid. A man stormed into the shop yelling that his windshield fluid had turned to ice overnight and demanded a refund. The mechanic asked what kind of fluid he'd used. The man proudly said, "Water. It's cheaper and more natural." Natural, yes. Functional, no. His entire washer system was now a frozen popsicle. The mechanic replaced the lines, but the man refused to learn. "Next time," he said, "I'll just use hot water before bed." That night, his driveway looked like a miniature glacier, proof that evolution occasionally slips on black ice. 24. The strange smell after every drive. A woman complained her car smelled like burnt popcorn every time she drove to work. The mechanic checked everything: belts, brakes, fluids, nothing. Then he opened the glove compartment and found an actual bag of microwave popcorn wedged against the cabin heater vent. She'd stored it there for emergencies. The heat had slowly cooked it during every commute. When he told her, she gasped and said, "So, I've been snacking on my car's pain?" "No, ma'am. Your car's been snacking on your brain cells." 25. The tire pressure problem. A customer said his car felt wobbly and uneven. The mechanic checked the tires and found one had 40 psi, another 10, another 70, and one completely flat. It looked like a rolling physics experiment. When asked if he'd checked the pressure recently, the man nodded proudly. "Every day, I just kicked them." Turns out, his diagnostic method involved shoe size, not science. The mechanic said, "Next time, try using a gauge." The man replied, "What's that? A different kind of shoe." 26. The engine that wouldn't start after every wash. A driver brought in his truck, furious that it refused to start after he washed it. "Happens every time," he said. "Right after I rinse the inside." The mechanic froze. "The inside?" The man nodded. He'd been hosing down his interior like it was a horse stable. His logic: "It's a truck. It's supposed to handle the outdoors." The mechanic pointed at the drenched dashboard, fried electronics, and soggy floor mats. "Sir," he said, "your truck's not waterproof. It's depressed." 27. The car that refused to move. A woman called her mechanic, claiming her car won't go anywhere, even though it sounds fine. When he arrived, he discovered the problem instantly. It was parked perfectly in neutral on a steep hill, pressed against a tree. She'd been revving it for 20 minutes, burning fuel and hope. When he explained, she gasped and said, "So trees can stop cars now?" Yes, that's actually been their main job for about 400 million years. 28. The sudden steering failure. A man showed up swearing his steering wheel had completely stopped working mid-turn. The mechanic inspected it and found a pile of sticky coins and candy wrappers jammed in the column. Turns out, the man's kid had been using the steering wheel slot as a piggy bank. "That's where Daddy's change goes," the child said proudly. The man looked horrified. The mechanic just smiled and said, "Technically, you've been paying a toll every time you turn left." 29. The homemade convertible. A man wanted a convertible but couldn't afford one, so he decided to help nature make it for him. Armed with a circular saw, he literally cut the roof off his 2003 Toyota Corolla. He strutted into the shop later, soaked from a thunderstorm, saying, "I think my car leaks." The mechanic stared at the gaping hole and said, "Buddy, that's not a leak, that's weather." The man insisted he'd seen people do it in movies. The mechanic replied, "Yeah, and they also survive explosions. Don't try that next." 30. The DIY cruise control. A driver told his mechanic his car took off by itself. Turns out he'd rigged a homemade cruise control system using duct tape, a rubber band, and a brick on the gas pedal. His reasoning? It's cheaper than the dealership option. It worked great, until traffic happened. He ended up in a cornfield, alive but humbled. When asked if he'd learned his lesson, he nodded and said, "Yeah, next time I'll use a lighter brick." Humanity's ability to innovate might be infinite, but unfortunately, so is its stupidity. 31. The trunk that wouldn't close. A woman brought in her car because the trunk refused to latch. She'd already fixed it herself with 10 feet of rope and a padlock. The mechanic tried the handle and realized the actual problem. She'd packed the trunk so full it was pressing against the lid. When told, she blinked and said, "So it's not the latch's fault?" "Nope, just gravity versus Costco." The mechanic untied the rope, and 3 lawn chairs, 2 lamps, and an inflatable flamingo shot out like confetti. It was less a car and more a mobile garage sale. 32. The upside-down license plate. A man came in furious that police kept pulling him over for his perfectly legal license plate. He'd installed it upside down because, as he explained, it looked more aggressive. When the mechanic pointed out that numbers are meant to be readable, he replied, "If they can't read it, they can't ticket me." That's technically a strategy, if your goal is to meet every cop in town. By the time he left, he had 3 citations, 1 warning, and a lifetime ban from common sense. 33. The homemade car jack. A man decided to change his own tire but didn't have a jack. No problem. He stacked up 5 cinder blocks and 1 old cooler, then climbed underneath. The result? A loud crash, a crushed ego, and a mechanic bill far higher than a $20 jack stand. When the shop asked why he'd risked his life, he said, "They make it look so easy on YouTube." That's true, but those videos usually end before the ambulance arrives. 34. The improved fuel economy experiment. A guy proudly told his mechanic he'd hacked the system by drilling a tiny hole in his gas cap to let the fumes breathe. He believed it would reduce fuel pressure and make the car lighter. The only thing it did was turn his sedan into a mobile Molotov cocktail. The mechanic replaced the cap and asked what inspired him. "TikTok," he said. The guy had a lab coat. The mechanic nodded slowly, writing Darwin Award nominee in the invoice notes. 35. The homemade lift kit. One truck owner wanted a tougher stance, but didn't want to pay for a real lift kit. So he stacked hockey pucks under the suspension, actual store-bought hockey pucks, 24 of them. On his first drive, the truck wobbled like a drunk giraffe, and 2 pucks shot out into traffic. When the mechanic showed him how unsafe it was, the man just grinned and said, "Well, it rides like a puckin' dream." The mechanic didn't even argue. Some stupidity fixes itself, eventually, when gravity takes over. 36. The air filter replacement. Gone wrong. A man came in saying his car sounded like a dying vacuum cleaner. When the mechanic opened the hood, he discovered the air filter had been replaced with a kitchen sponge. The man explained that a filter's a filter and proudly said it cost him 89 cents. The sponge had sucked in so much dirt it looked like a fossilized brownie. The mechanic asked why he didn't just buy the real part, and the man replied, "Because mine smells like lemon." It did. Lemon-scented despair. 37. The frozen door locks. Solution. During a winter freeze, a driver tried to thaw his car's frozen locks using what he called the warmest thing in the house, a hairdryer plugged into an extension cord that ran 100 feet across his snowy driveway. The cord shorted out, tripped the breaker, and left half the neighborhood in darkness. The locks stayed frozen, but his porch light exploded. When the mechanic asked if he'd tried de-icer, he said, "I didn't want to use chemicals." Right, because electrocution is all natural. 38. The brake light that wouldn't turn off. A frustrated woman showed up because her brake lights stayed on, even when she wasn't pressing the pedal. The mechanic crawled under the dashboard and found the problem instantly. A banana peel jammed under the brake switch. She gasped and said, "Oh, I remember eating that." Turns out she'd dropped her breakfast during a red light and decided to just push it out of the way with her foot. The banana fused to the switch like nature's prank. She asked, "Is that covered under warranty?" The mechanic replied, "Only if it came with potassium coverage." 39. The rain sensor malfunction. A man complained that his automatic wipers were turning on randomly, even when it's dry. The mechanic examined the windshield and noticed a single slice of bologna stuck right over the rain sensor. When asked, the driver said, "Oh, that's from lunch." Apparently, he'd been eating a sandwich while driving, and the meat had flopped out, lodging itself perfectly against the glass. Every time the sunlight hit it, the sensor thought it was rain. It's the first known case of lunch meat activating WeatherTech. 40. The electrical failure. Mystery: a car kept blowing fuses, and the owner swore it was sabotage by the dealership. The mechanic spent an hour tracing the circuit and found the real culprit, a squirrel, or rather what used to be one. The animal had nested under the hood, chewed through the wiring, and shorted itself into taxidermy. When shown the evidence, the owner said, "That's not mine," as if someone had borrowed his squirrel. The mechanic nodded and said, "I'll mark it down as a rental then." 41. The battery drain problem. A man complained that his car battery kept dying overnight, even after 3 replacements. The mechanic finally asked to see where he parked it, behind his house, under a street light, and with the dome light on all night, every night. The man said, "Yeah, I leave it on so burglars know someone's inside." Technically, he was right. Someone was inside. 12 volts of pure stupidity, slowly draining the car to death. The mechanic replaced the bulb, then quietly replaced his faith in humanity with sarcasm. 42. The engine overheating mystery. A woman came in furious that her brand new car kept overheating, even though she'd kept it full of coolant. The mechanic checked, no coolant, just pink lemonade. She admitted she'd run out of antifreeze and thought, "It's liquid and cold. Same thing." The radiator was now a sticky, acidic slushy. When told, she'd essentially brewed a citrus smoothie inside her engine. She said, "At least it smells nice." The mechanic took a deep breath, handed her a repair bill the size of a car payment, and muttered, "Ma'am, you've officially voided both your warranty and the laws of thermodynamics." 43. The engine that wouldn't rev. A teenager brought his brand new sports car in, saying it didn't sound cool enough. The mechanic checked and found he'd filled the gas tank with diesel because the nozzle fit, so it must be right. The car refused to start, and when told why, the kid said, "But diesel sounds tougher." The mechanic sighed. "Yeah, so does bankruptcy." The repair cost almost as much as the car's insurance, and probably his dad's trust fund. 44. The car wash catastrophe. A man called his mechanic screaming that the car wash ripped his roof off. Turns out he'd driven in with a luggage carrier still on top. The brushes grabbed it, tore it free, and flung it across 3 lanes like a UFO. When the manager confronted him, the man yelled, "They should warn people not to bring luggage." The mechanic said, "They did. It's called common sense." 45. The towing disaster. A guy decided to save a few bucks by towing his own broken-down car. His method? Tie it to his wife's minivan with an old garden hose. 10 minutes later, physics filed for divorce. The hose snapped, the car rolled backward down a hill and gracefully parked itself in a neighbor's swimming pool. When asked why he didn't use a rope or chain, he shrugged, "Hose looks sturdier." It's not often you get to write hydraulic failure, and mean it literally. 46. The homemade electric car. One aspiring inventor proudly unveiled his self-built, eco-friendly vehicle. It ran entirely on, and this is true, 9 car batteries wired together with jumper cables and hope. He managed to drive it 6 feet before it caught fire and died in a puff of ozone and ambition. "It was working fine until it didn't," he said, as smoke poured from what used to be the trunk. The mechanic clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations, you just discovered spontaneous combustion." 47. The car that wouldn't stop. A panicked woman screamed that her car wouldn't stop accelerating. The mechanic found the cause in seconds: a water bottle wedged under the gas pedal. She had dropped it while driving, ignored it, and then blamed the car for trying to kill her. "It's possessed," she cried. "No, it's hydrated." The mechanic removed the bottle, started the car, and said, "Ma'am, your demon was Dasani." 48. The car in the kitchen. And finally, the crown jewel of mechanical idiocy. A man proudly told his mechanic he'd figured out indoor storage for his prized Mustang. His plan? Drive it into the house every night to protect it from the weather. One evening, he misjudged the angle, hit the gas instead of the brake, and parked the car halfway through his kitchen wall. His wife called the shop asking if drywall counts as a warranty issue. The mechanic said, "Only if your insurance covers stupidity and tile damage." The man later bragged that it was the only car in town with open-concept parking. Humans and cars. One builds them, the other destroys them, usually by accident. So, which one deserves the golden wrench of stupidity? The DIY convertible? The pink lemonade coolant? Or the guy who parked in his own kitchen? Vote for your favorite disaster below. And remember, mechanics don't fix cars. They fix humans who shouldn't have one.